get started? Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. All members are present except for Greg.
No.
Minutes of 7/7. Does everyone have those minutes? Yes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Minutes of September 1. Does everyone have those minutes?
Yep.
Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved. No, I have a question
During
on the chairman's comments.
During the comments?
Yeah.
We have to have the motion first.
Why don't you have a motion on the second first,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and then you can discuss.
So there's a motion. Is there a
Stand
second?
corrected.
Second.
All right. Is there any discussion?
The second.
Yes.
Yes.
I didn't comment on the question. I asked the chairman to look into the issues so described. So I'd like that changed.
Okay,
What would you like to read?
Mr. O'Brien asked the chairman to look into the issues that have occurred in the town that may have been the responsibility of the Board of Finance. Such issue as the transfer of money, the possible transfer of money from the Board of Ed to the Police Department that was denied. And we want to make sure that going forward that such transfers are either for or against the statute. Okay? And also I asked that the question be answered as to whether or not the administration can move money from one department to another without going to the Board of Finance. And the third part was whether or not any department can use unused money that is not budgeted
Okay.
for any reason.
that's already there.
So there are three parts to the question.
Okay,
Get all that?
yes.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes with those changes, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
One abstention. All right. Board of Education report. Good evening, ladies.
Good evening. So a little update on our building projects, which are all moving along nicely. The track, turf, and tennis court is nearing completion. We had the final coat put on the track today, and they still have to put the lines for the lanes down, which is takes about 2 hours to dry, and it's about a couple hours to actually put the lines down once they're determined and laid out. So that's maybe half a day's worth of work. With this beautiful weather this week, looks like that'll certainly take place. So we're expecting that all the sandbags and all of the plastic that you see that has been protecting any overspray on the new turf field will be removed tomorrow. They're also completing the final coat on the tennis courts, and they are awaiting the final lining of those as well. So you'll see the green and the blue overlay, and then it just needs the white lines to show the out of bounds and that sort of thing. So those are nearing completion. So the project is nearly finished. There is, the turf field has been completed, the testing has been completed. There's one final phase of testing that happens 2 to 6 weeks after the field's been played on. And so everything up to this point has been done, and those tests have all passed. So we are excited to see the first game be played. We're not sure, it'll be whatever varsity team has their first home game when the field is ready. So hopefully we'll see some action there in the next week or so. So that's the update on the track turf and tennis. The window project really came together at the last minute, but you know, it was awesome because the school opened, the windows were in, every classroom was functioning. We had screens, temporary screens for every window. You know, class was able to just resume like, you know, it hadn't really been disrupted. And the really nice part about this particular project was it was expected that 3 of the 4 wings would be completed, but the contractor did all 4 wings, so no classroom was left untouched. All the windows went into all the instructional areas, all the classroom areas at one time, which was really nice because he had all the subs there, so he wanted to keep that work moving along. So every teacher was able to get back into their classroom on the first day of school. We're in the process now of installing the bookcases, which we knew would come a little bit after. They've been coming in on weekends and after hours to finish that work, as well as hooking up all the HVAC units, which are all going to be on controls that are now automated, so we can see if there's any temperature issues at any particular time. So that's all kind of happening through the month of September, but really outside of the work that would disrupt a classroom or instruction in any way. So that's really progressed nicely. And the roof is getting its final pieces of trim around the exterior. So the roof itself is all completed. All that has been, all the old roof is torn off, all the new roof has been put down. And so it's really the finishing touches on the roof, which again will be throughout the month of September, and they've made good progress and have been really you know, very accommodating to work with, very lack of disruption to the classroom and to the school day. So that's moved along very nicely. And then moving on to budget, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you might have on the projects, but the 15-16 budget, we obviously are just in the process now of encumbering all of our salaries so that we can begin to look at our first quarter projection. So we're kind of working through all those final numbers, all of the benefit numbers and things of that sort. We've had a wonderful first 3 months with the co-op that we joined. So far, the co-op has about $1.7 million in reserve, which is incredible for the first 3 months. So we're building that reserve. We'd like to see that by the end of the year be somewhere around $3 million. So that's really moved along nicely. So that's kind of an overview.
All the projects are within budget, the roof,
Yes.
everything's in budget.
Yes.
What are the lights going on the field?
Maybe the superintendent would like to.
Oh, nice.
You're just in time.
When you started the school year versus what the budgeted numbers were for teachers and paraprofessionals and all, are the numbers the same as the number of teachers, dollar figure salaries?
Well, that's obviously a bit of an ebb and flow because we've had teachers who have left towards the end of the year and new teachers that we've hired. So that's kind of what we're in the process of looking at now, is measuring what we budgeted against who we've actually hired and looking at those plus deltas, and then that sort of is how we come up with our first quarter projection. We look at that through June 30th.
Any reduction in teachers or increase in teachers versus?
I think it's about the same, right?
It is.
As the budget
Yes.
was stated.
There's no increase.
Julie, how about in the middle school, in the cafeteria area, when I toured over there, there was some issues with the windows looking out into the center court there with the cafeteria windows and stuff. Were those part of the repairs this time, or?
They're not part of the repairs this summer, because we did the roof at the middle school, but what they will probably end up doing there, what we'll end up eventually doing is wrapping those, replacing some of that wood and wrapping it as we had talked about in vinyl. So far, there hasn't been any issue with them, but we're watching them to obviously make sure that there's not going to be an issue with that wood rotting out or causing a problem with drainage or water.
So with the repairs to the auditorium and the repairs to the hallways and gymnasium, we won't see any drip spots anymore when we walk through the middle school?
That is the ultimate goal, yes. You know, some of that, and actually we had that heavy rain the other day, and we did have areas where the flashing hadn't yet been secured, because that's the piece they're going around and putting that edge, you know, flashing goes on with an edge piece of sheet metal. And so some of the areas that they looked at were some of those areas that are flashed where roof lines come together or a roof line goes up. And that area was one that they did double and triple check. So, you know, that's been kind of a problem spot because the water sits there, and depending on the direction of the wind and the rain on a given day could be problematic. So they know about that area to pay particular attention to.
Thank you.
Now that the roof is almost done, is there any discussion about like solar panels up there?
We have been discussing the possibility of looking into photovoltaics, and it's just a question, because now we know that you don't need to put holes in the roof to do it, that they can be done on tracks. It's something that could be considered for a future project.
The problem with solar on a building, just as it is in your home, it's a power purchase agreement. They're there for 20 years.
Right.
You enter into an agreement, it reduces your electric bill, which is great. But if they're there for 20 years, so you just, as a community that votes on appropriations to a roof and electricity and operating budgets, we better be darn certain that this is what we want to lock ourselves into for 20 years. And you can lock yourself into a very stable price, but maybe the question becomes, what's going to be down the road in 5 years, you know? And so it's a discussion. I've had them right here on this roof. It's just something I'm hesitant to do because it's a 20-year commitment. So it has to be very carefully considered. Towns do it. You know, there's plenty of towns and boards of ed that have done it. It's not everywhere, but it has been done.
And it has to make sense for that particular building to have, you know, the right exposure.
Yeah. I mean, we have a perfect east-west exposure here on this building.
And there is some panel there now. I don't know how they're still working. I don't know if we've been even done an assessment on how well they're working, but they've been there a while.
Right, they run the hot water heater. We did a very small solar project about 4 or 5 years ago when we had to replace the hot water heater in the gymnasium area for the locker rooms. And so we got a grant and we did that project, and that those panels heat the hot water for that end of the building. And it's been fine, you know, they've worked fine. They're mounted actually on the chimney because that gave us the best exposure. And it was only, you know, 4 or 5 panels, so it's not a huge amount. But one of the things that, Carl, when you talk about solar is, you know, the panels are warm, they're hot to touch, and that's a low single-story building. So part of the discussion that Jan and I have had over the course of time, when it comes to talking about solar, particularly on that building, is you have to be concerned about children, and, you know, they can be a little mischievous at times, and, you know, so that's a difficult roof when, you know, it's accessible, let's just say, you know, and so that's a consideration. And the panels are getting better as they're getting more new generations of them, so they're less hot to the touch. So those are all the kinds of things that we'd have to really study before we go forward.
Can I ask a procedural question on the solar issue? Can the Board of Ed decide on buildings that they have put in solar on their roofs without the Board of Selectmen?
You know what I would say to that is yes. Because you know, John, good question. You know, it's you're entering into a lease, really, a 20-year lease. Yeah. So that may be an issue.
Plus the building.
But the lease is not further obligating the town to additional monies. I mean, it's reducing your electric bill. If we ever do it, we'll have a lawyer review it and give an opinion on it. But I don't know that anyone's rushing out to do it. We've had this discussion.
No, I'm just asking.
Yeah, and I don't.
It's a good question.
Yeah, It's a 20-year lease. So, you know, there's a very good chance you'd have to go to town meeting, but on the other hand, it's not for a new appropriation.
Most of the programs out there are zero cost to the,
Yeah, right. It's a reduction in appropriation. I don't know the answer to that, but I can find out quite easily.
I think because, I know in the state of Connecticut, you can't be beyond a 5-year commitment on any contract, so that may be something that, you know, a lease may be different, but we'd have to ask. We wouldn't be able to go forward without getting that answer.
On your budget, you have on the schools, I forget the exact amount per school, but like $5,000 a year just for replacement of lockers. Do you have a system for that, or what percentage of lockers do you have to replace every year?
We don't actually have a line item in our capital plan for lockers. We had, what you may be thinking of is, we had a line item to replace, we did the middle school, a portion of the middle school, and then there's another portion, we kind of do it in sections. So the ones that are being looked at now are the ones that are located in the locker rooms for the boys and girls at the middle school. And we replaced the locker rooms at the high school, so you've seen like kind of an ongoing replacement. They were 40-plus years old at the high school and, you know, very rusted and difficult to close and all of that.
So you replace a section at a time?
A section at a time.
Not as they're broken, but as a section?
Correct.
Okay.
Right, we try to do a segment, and we've been replacing them with slightly larger lockers because kids can't fit their backpacks into the size lockers that we currently have. So as we haven't replaced any of the lockers in the high school hallways. Those are all original, they were repainted with the building project. But we did replace the locker rooms at the high school. And we replaced one segment in the middle school in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade hallways, which were tiny lockers that those kids could not, they don't carry their backpacks from classroom to classroom like high school does. So we had those replaced so that they can store their backpacks in them.
Okay, thank you.
Any unexpected special ed costs so far that, since this?
So far, so good, I think.
I think we're approximately level funded. A couple of things in the works right now.
Are there any concerns out there that worry you?
Any concerns that worry me? No, not at the moment. I think, you know, we have a pretty good handle on where we're at. Just before the superintendent got here, and she's part of the board for the consortium, the health insurance is always a big piece, and we feel very good about that. So that's always a factor that we worry about, but I think we're going to be fine. And as far as in new hires, I think we're good on employees. So those are the two biggest pieces of our budget.
And what,
So you know that we are, you know, with the consortium for health insurance now, and self-insured this year. You know, preliminary numbers and the amount of money that we were able to build up in the reserve leave us pretty comfortable for our first year, but we're watching it closely. Because yeah, that's the tricky part, is starting that up.
and what's the next contract to come up? Who's are the next contract?
Secretaries.
We're in Paris, we haven't said.
Oh, sorry, I can't count Paris is done, we're almost done with that, and then secretaries.
Any other questions?
Administrators.
Well, they're done.
Right.
We're at TA, right, we have a tentative agreement with the administrators, so one's done, one's not signed but done, one's almost done, and secretaries come up this year.
Thank you.
With
Yeah.
your permission, could I just leave, there's some for the public too, some handouts on the
Sure.
ribbon cutting for the turf field invitation for the Board of
Yeah.
Finance, and also some information about a walkthrough that we want to do of at least two of the projects. We're not going to take you up on the roof, but anybody who wants to join us on October 17th, we're going to start at the high school and do a tour of the facility there, and then a tour of the Goodwin Window Project, both inside and out, and we thought maybe you'd like to join us. And as I said, there's some for members of the public too, but we'll be sending out invitations to anybody from the community who wants to come, so I'll leave them with Jerry.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you for coming.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
See you. All right. Sea level rise, committee. I'd like
I know we're literally turning our backs on you, but we don't mean to do that. I didn't do that. Good evening. I'm Larry Ritzhaupt, a member of the Town of Old Saybrook's Committee on Sea Level Rise and Climate Adaptation. And so on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank the Board of Selectmen as well as the Board of Finance for allowing us an opportunity to present to you tonight the findings that we've come up with. We have our final report currently in draft. It will be provided to the town by the end of this year. And what you will see tonight is a high-level summary of that report. So the purpose of our committee was to educate and share recommendations from Sea Level Rise and the Climate Adaptation Committee. We were formed through the request of our first selectman, Carl Fortuna, as part of a recommendation that came out of the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. And essentially, we think it's very important that going forward, based on all of the most current data, that we take sea level rise and climate change into consideration when we are planning for the town. Second part of the presentation tonight, and I'll do a brief introduction. Robert Eust, another member of our committee, and I would be remiss in not thanking all the members of our committee that have been meeting nearly twice a month for the last 18 months in order to come together and make these recommendations. We'll have a brief presentation on sea level rise and climate change. We call it Sea Level Rise and Climate Change 101. So again, a very high level look at what we are expecting. And then finally, we'll come back and share with you the recommendations that will be based on our review of the current data. There we go. Like any good committee, we came up with a mission statement early on. Our mission statement is that basically we'll provide recommended policies and actions for the town to adapt to and mitigate against the effects of climate change and the impact of sea level rise on Old Saybrook in the near and long term. Near we've defined as within the next 20 years, longer term within the next 70 years. And then an important part of what we feel is needed is that the committee will educate the townspeople about our findings. And we began that earlier this summer with a presentation to the public at the pavilion down at the point. Several members of our committee are here tonight. We just want to raise our hands. So there's Robert, Janice, Doug, Michael, Tom, myself. And what you'll see as a consistent theme when we discuss each of these areas is we've divided our report into three major sections: the environment, the community, and the economy. And we ask three questions within each of those sections. That is, where are we going, and how do we get there? And so that's the format that you'll see presented for each of these sections, basically forming our recommendations. In order to begin our work, the committee found it important to go out and educate itself by discussing all the various data with as many experts as we could. Some of those experts are listed here, Ralph Lewis, and they include basically university staff, the government staff, including our own town government staff, and so James O'Donnell, who's the CIRCA director, Adam Welchel, who is the Nature Conservancy's chief scientific officer for Connecticut, Roman Zajac, who's at the University of New Haven. All those people came in to help educate us around what the impact of sea level rise might be on various things, whether it was the coastal ecology or saltwater marshes, etc. And it probably, I want to point out, and that's why the big bold sentences at the end, is to thank the people on the town staff. And what you probably have all come to recognize far sooner than we did was the valuable input and guidance that we received from our town staff. So Christine Nelson, Chris Costa, and Sandy Prislow in particular, as well as some other members of the town staff. So our thanks to all of you for that. At this point, we'll have Robert go ahead and again provide you sort of a high-level overview of what we're expecting in terms of sea level rise.
Thank you. I'm going to do this relatively quickly tonight because I feel that the most important part from your perspective is what are we recommending and what are where do we go from here, basically. So, sea level rise 101, if you would. I'm going to come up here. Basic question, and the answer is yes. We've pretty much concluded that the science is settled on sea level rise. It's happening for a number of reasons, affected by climate change. It's one of the impacts of climate change is that the sea is rising. Next. This is a tide gauge from New London. You can see the slope is going up. Next. Likewise, this is Bridgeport. When we first put this presentation together, we did not have a tide gauge in Old Saybrook. We do now, but it has, what, maybe 1 week's worth of data. This is going back 40, 50 years. Doesn't look like much. 2.5 millimeters a year. That's about 1/10 of an inch. But over the course of a decade, course of half a century, you've got about, this here is about 1/3 of a meter, or about a foot. Next slide. But so what? It's about a foot. What's it going to do in Old Saybrook, and what's it going to do in the future? That's what we're interested in trying to determine. We didn't have a study here. We know we're impacted. We know we're potentially seriously impacted because we've got the river and we've got the sound. So we're surrounded by water, all of which is going to begin rising. Next. So we looked at various technical documents. Some I could understand, some I couldn't. We got help from our scientist friends, and we came across the idea that we needed a document from which to start. And we were able to locate a document authored by the Corps of Engineers based on NOAA data that summarizes very well the science at the time, 2013, sea level rise. It also had in it very useful projection models. And we decided to use that because we needed something. We needed a document that we could base our recommendations on and our projections on. So we used that. One of our recommendations, I'll jump ahead a little bit, is that the town continue to look at the science. And as the science advances, these numbers may change. So what does the number say? Next. This is the result. This is for Old Saybrook. Actually going back over here a little bit. 2035 up top. We chose to use the high estimate, and I'll talk about that in a second. 2035, sometime around the mid-century, if you will, 1 foot of sea level rise. By the end of the century, 4 feet. The actual number, I mean, it shows the 2 decimal points here. It doesn't really matter, because if we reach 1 foot in 2037 or 2033, it doesn't really matter. At some point, we're going to get to 1 foot of rise, and at some point in the future, we'll get to 4 feet. Did you see the slope of the curve? That's what's most important. So it was 1 foot over 50 years. You see the slope of the curve is going up tremendously. And if we could take that out a couple of thousand years, very, very stable. And that's what is sometimes difficult to comprehend, is that the sea level has been very stable for thousands of years. Civilization has developed around a constant sea level. It's not constant anymore. And it certainly won't be constant in the future. That's what we've found. Next. So why did we choose to use the high estimate? It's really a risk-based decision. We wanted to be conservative in our estimates so that we are conservative in our recommendations. Eventually, we will reach those 4-foot level. If you're building a large infrastructure project or relocating roads, for example, that's going to be a long-term investment. You want to err on the conservative side versus less conservative when you're going to be able to go back and rebuild that road. You only get one shot at it typically, so you better be conservative. And as I mentioned, the science is still being studied. The effects of the glacier melts in Greenland and Antarctica starting to become much more of a concern. So those estimates may in fact be going up. I've not seen any studies that say the estimates are going down. So we chose to use the high estimate for those reasons. Next. We also, through our education, realized that there's more to Old Saybrook than just the shoreline. Our geology is different. Our beaches face different directions. That has to do with how the wave energy hits us and how the storms hit us. And if you look around, our beach areas are fully developed. Except for the marsh areas, there's not much open land. So all those things make us unique. It was very interesting. We heard from the state geologist how Old Saybrook was formed, and I won't talk about it, but I found it fascinating. I don't know about you guys. Completely different than the rest of the shoreline. Next. I'm going very quickly here, so if you have questions, feel free to have. I'm going quickly so we can get to the recommendations part. All right, so what does all this mean? This is really what matters. You all know where this is, the Great Hammock here, Indian Town, Trapper Beach. This is the monthly high tide now. The blue indicates where water is. It doesn't say necessarily how deep it is, but there's just water. All right, Tom, I'm going to need you to flip back and forth here. All right, so now go forward.
It's been working so far.
There we go.
Okay. This is like the crescendo of the presentation here. All right, so now we've gone 1 foot. Go back, forward, back, forward. You notice some additional blue down in here, but not a whole heck of a lot. Again, this is monthly high tides. Now go forward. This is 4 foot. So this is what we expect towards the end of this current century. Let's keep our eye, how about down here at Great Hammock? Go back. There. 1 foot, 4 foot, 1 foot, 4 foot. Okay. But how high is 4 feet? What does that really mean? Go forward one more. This is the known level at Storm Sandy. Again, let's just keep our eye down here, just for giggles. Back to 4 feet, Sandy. Looks very much the same. Effectively, what this is saying is we can expect Storm Sandy level inundation monthly towards the end of the century. I don't know how many of you drove around after that storm, but it was pretty severe. Ask this gentleman right here. He lives there. So that's one aspect. This is monthly high tide. But we know we're going to get storms. Right? That's a given. We know we're going to get storms. The prediction actually is that the storms will be more frequent and more severe. But regardless, we know we're going to get Storm Sandy level storms come in at some time. So if they come in when there's 4 feet of sea level rise, what happens next? This is that same map. The red now indicates the additional area that is inundated with a Storm Sandy level surge on top of 4 feet of sea level rise. That's pretty much everything south of Post Road. And just for kicks, we did the whole town. Next. This is the actual numbers from Storm Sandy, so the inundation throughout town. Now add 4 feet of sea level rise to that same storm. There's old Saybrook with the storm towards the end of the century. So I know you're all, tell me where you live and I'll point out your house, because that's the only thing that people are interested in.
Where's Boston Post Road in this map?
Boston Post Road right here. Right here. My house is right here, by the way. I'm in the yellow, so I'm okay. Yeah, I have to road to my house, but that's okay. So, any questions on this? This is the crux of what we found. Is sea levels are rising 1 foot by mid-century or thereabouts, 4 feet by towards the end of the century, and the real impact is when we have a storm on top of that.
Question. How do you know it's uniform? Is this just an assumption that they say all areas is going to be 1 to 4 feet, or because I mean some studies say, well, you know, some places it's falling. So how do we know that that's? Is that just the general assumption that okay, we're part of the rising
within the
level?
scale of Old Saybrook, it's going to be pretty constant. They're going to be pretty steady. Janice, you want to answer?
Well, also in particular, the Northeast is dropping. For instance, on the West Coast, the land is actually rising. So it's more of an issue in the Northeast of the United States.
Why is that?
It's just what's happening with the plates.
It's a geological phenomenon. When the glaciers are retreating, the land is leveling itself.
And I'd like to add right here that the NOAA data upon which we're basing did not take into consideration the vast amount of melting in Antarctica.
So there was I mean, you saw what was out there today, something about the Antarctic ice melt will not affect sea level, and it was one of.
There's two things in Antarctica. One is sea ice.
Yeah.
If sea ice melts, it's already in the water. That doesn't change the water level. It's the land ice.
Okay.
That when it melts,
Did you see that? Did you see that report out today?
I haven't read it. I know it's there, but I haven't
I saw
read
the
it.
report that said if we burn all the fossil fuel, all the ice in Antarctica will be gone.
But it wouldn't cause sea level rise. I mean, and that was apparently one of the real climate theorists that said that. Anyway, enough. I don't want to. I just happened to read that today. I thought
Which
that was
is one of the
interesting.
reasons why we're recommending that we continue repeatedly to look at the science.
When we tried to find a set of data to use, what we found was that the various analyses that were done all sort of converged, and so they were all headed in the same way. We picked the data set we did because it was solid, it was backed by NOAA weather, we felt that was important to use something that we could depend on. And again, like Janice said, the current estimates that are evolving since this committee started have increased the amount of sea level rise. And so, like Robert said, one of the things we want to do is make sure that we continue to monitor this, because based on the current models and the projections into the future, and they are just that, they're models and projections, we believe that they're likely to change, and those current indications are that the change will be greater than what we've based our current recommendations on.
Do you have a question?
I'm finding a lot of conflicting articles on the internet since May of this year. Like one here says how global warming is a scam, how it began. There's another one here that says rise of sea level is the greatest lie ever told. So there seems to be a lot of conflicting information from what
Not
you're
in the
talking
valid science, there's no conflict.
What source are you using?
Yeah, so.
Well, I can show you the stuff online. I'm not here to argue with you, but I'm just saying that there's a different source on this that is going against it. The other thing,
You
you know, whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter at this point, because I'm not here to argue with it, but I'm seeing a lot of information that's contrary, that the winter's gonna get colder. And for instance, this last winter was extremely cold, and there were a lot less mosquitoes, a lot less ticks, and they feel as though that in reading some of this stuff, because I've been interested in this because I'm affected where I live, and the other thing that concerns me is, you know, I happen to do mortgages, and you know, they keep raising the level, which means more people get thrown into this flood insurance business. And if we know all these facts, why are we allowing people to build houses in these areas or reconstruct them? Like I've done loans for people that are out of flood zone, don't need insurance, and then since they built the house 5 or 6 years ago, now they need flood insurance. And it's costly. I mean, I've got one lady, she's paying $13,000 a year in flood insurance for $250,000, and yet the house is worth $1.25 million. And at some point, are the values of these properties going to go down the tubes? And is our town going to be worth a hell of a lot less?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because all this
So
flooding you see.
is there a message here? It's time to get out.
Let's listen to the whole talk. No, science progresses, building, and there are models where you can, let's listen to talk because we do address that.
Climate change is also going to affect the town in other ways. The frequency of storms is rising, the severity of those storms is also rising. These are rain events here. We looked at the plant species, the animal species, and how they're going to be impacted. All that will be in the report. We'll talk briefly about some of those findings and recommendations here tonight. I think that's the end of what I have. We'll get into.
Are the buttons not working so well? Go ahead to the next.
Back to.
Thank you. So we appreciate your interest and your questions, and that's one of the reasons we're providing this today. Again, just a quick review, the environment, the community, and the economics. We broke down our report into those 3 areas. Where are we going, and how do we get there? We'll be presenting our draft recommendations today based on what we believe is the most current and best science out there. And it falls in line with what the Intergovernmental Climate Report was out of the United Nations. It falls in line with what the U.S. government presented as well as the state of Connecticut presented. And by monitoring that and the data as we go along, we'll find out. You know, our hope is that it won't rise that much, but hope is not a strategy. So we've taken the best numbers we could find based on the data, and we make our recommendations based on that. So go ahead. So first, the environment, coastal geology, plants and animals. Where are we? Sea level rise, based on our current understanding of the data, threatens to destroy our shorelines and flood our marshes. Where would we like to go? We'd like to protect those marshes and our coastline against erosion. We'd like to plan for marsh migration to higher levels because those marshes will drown with sea level rise. And we'd like to promote the health of our tidal wetlands to preserve habitat for the vulnerable species. Go ahead. So how do we get there? I think one of our high-level recommendations has been to develop a resiliency plan for the town. We want to acquire land for marsh migration, and based on a study that was done by the Nature Conservancy here in Old Saybrook, we've identified parcels of land that would be available for acquisition to allow marsh migration to occur. We'd like to maintain healthy wetlands. Culture. Where are we? We're a historic New England shoreline village, and we're threatened. Beach communities are likely to disappear or are disappearing because currently during normal high tides we have some nuisance flooding in parts of town now, in the streets out in Shaker Beach. Numerous historical sites, monuments, and dwellings are at risk. Next slide. So what would we like to do? Where would we like to go with that? We want to maintain our shoreline ambience of a coastal village. We want to preserve our historic sites, attract business, and maximize public access to the water, which is one of the things that draw people to this town, the ability to be close to nature, close to water, and appreciate and enjoy the marshes and the waters that surround the old Saybrook. Next slide. So how do we get there? We're recommending that we develop a preservation plan for the historic sites. We would like the sea level rise to be in the plan, to be incorporated into the plan for conservation and development. And we would like to include water access and nature trails in the resiliency plan. Again, continue to maintain access for the public to the waters and the nature, and with nature trails that surround marshes that are associated with our town. Next slide. Public health in community. Basically, where are we? We have nuisance flooding in roadways currently without any sea level rise. We have contamination. We have the likelihood of contamination of groundwater and coastal waters based on septic systems. There are algae blooms that are currently occurring during the periods of August in the western Long Island Sound. We have dead zones currently because of the nitrogens that have been in. Algae bloom, as algae blooms die off, they take the oxygen out. This past spring, we've had a very large depletion of oxygen out in Connick Lake out in Long Island, in the eastern end of Long Island, which is similar to what happens here. And so this dead area continues to grow, and we would like to be able to make sure that we do something to help stop that. Next slide. So where are we going? We want to maintain a healthy environment. We'd like to control runoff water, and we would like to allow the plants and the animals to prosper. All good things. Next slide. But how do we do that? One of the things that we would recommend is that we monitor bacterial counts in our coastal waters, something that's not currently being done. We'd like to pursue sustainable wastewater management, including septic, which is a very, very tough issue and something the town is working very hard to meet the legal requirements that they're under currently. We'd like to discuss shared risk among the neighbors. Old Saybrook is not unique in the coastal towns in the sense of the kinds of risk that they are exposed to. So we will not be able to solve this all on our own. We're going to have to discuss and share what we learn and how best practices with other shoreline communities. Next slide. Economics, the impact on homes and buildings. So where are we? A large portion of the tax base is at risk, as it was raised earlier in the question. Somewhere around 51–52% of the residents are in that 500-year flood zone. So we have a significant portion of our residents that would be at risk at sort of a 500-year flood. The areas at risk will increase with sea level rise and climate change, as Robert explained, basically as the sea level comes up and we have more severe events, that's going to increase or add to the flooding that the town is exposed to. And the cost of adapting to any of this will be high. So we understand that this will not be an easy thing to solve or to deal with going forward. Next slide. So where are we getting, where are we going? So we would like to motivate owners to upgrade where feasible. Currently, lots of FEMA regulations out there that provide some guidance. There's a possibility of moving to higher density housing adapted to sea level rise, so condominiums or apartment buildings built in areas that would be secure in the face of sea level rise and climate change. Unsuitable areas, we should think about trying to acquire those and use for mitigation, and make infrastructure improvements to enhance property values. And so in order to maintain property values, people have to feel secure that their homes are going to be safe and can be accessed during storms or can be reached by emergency services during those storms. Excellent. So how do we get there? Well, we've installed a tide gauge, which is a great thing. So on the website, just to kind of, it's not going to solve a lot, but at least we're going to have data on Old Saybrook. It's going to go live. We're going to have rainfall, wind speed, sea level rise, all that stuff will be read out automatically and be accessed in the future, soon, hopefully, on the website. Develop community groups to advise residents, propose land use and zoning changes, and formulate acquisition strategies. So for those properties that appear to be in areas that we will not be able to protect, we need to think about perhaps an acquisition strategy. Next slide. Economics, the infrastructure, the impact on transportation and infrastructure. So where are we? Town reports and plans have not taken sea level rise and climate change into consideration. Not surprisingly, basically, sea level rise and climate change has continued to become a very important issue and receive more and more coverage. And so we're here today because the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan recognized the need to do that. We've had a meeting with the Planning Commission and we've reviewed all of town plans, and so what we're saying is going forward we need to continue to take sea level rise and climate change into consideration in any plans that the town makes. Infrastructure is not being adapted on pace with homes, so we've had a lot of building. There are very few parcels of land left that are buildable in Old Saybrook. We have a lot of homes built, and there's a complex regulatory environment. So it's not again, not an easy thing to solve. Next slide. So where are we going? We'd like to have an infrastructure plan to meet these challenging conditions. And again, challenging conditions is quite right. Roads and utility upgraded to the new normal. So the new normal is we currently have nuisance flooding, and I suspect the new normal will continue to evolve so that we will have more nuisance flooding. And prioritize available funds and seek alternative funding sources. And by prioritizing those things, it will take a lot of planning and a lot of thought. I think Robert mentioned earlier, if you're going to build something for 10 years that has a lifespan of 10 years, making sure that it's safe from afoot is probably a good thing. If you build some resource that's going to be there for 50 or 100 years, you should think more carefully about how to plan for that in order to have it be sustained as sea level rise continues. Next slide. So how do we get there? Establish a permanent town commission to maintain focus. We are a committee that's been together about a year and a half and will sunset. And it's very important with all of the business of the town and all the things that you have to consider, whether it's the school system, the police departments, all of that, to have someone continue to watch and monitor what sea level rise is doing and what we're doing in terms of planning for that and incorporating that into our plans. Develop criteria for projects and priorities. That goes back to, how long do you want this thing to last and how much do you want to build at risk. Include sea level rise and climate change in the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. We're hoping to have our report accepted by the Board of Selectmen after they review it. And then to hire a grant writer. Along the shoreline communities, Guilford is probably the furthest ahead. They were able to gain access to grants probably 4 or 5 years ago. They've done a lot of very good work. Old Saybrook is in the next sort of lead in terms of other shoreline communities. We're early on to adapt to sea level rise and climate change committee. It's starting to happen in other towns along the shoreline. So because we will not be able to fund all these ourselves, we think that the importance of a grant, it's very important to have a grant writer as state and federal funds become available. Next slide. So recommendations for immediate action, again, these are the very high level recommendations. We have a little more granularity in our report, which will be presented to the Board of Selectmen before the end of the year. We'd like to make sure that we incorporate sea level rise in all town plans and planning going forward. Establish a permanent commission to help evaluate and consider plans for town activities. Form a citizens advisory group so that there is sort of a group of people that continue to keep up to date with the data as well as regulations and can talk about best practices that they gain from discussions with other committees or other communities. Hire a grant writer, prepare a coastal resiliency plan, and install a tide gauge. And thanks to the current administration, we have the tide gauge taken care of, which is probably the least expensive and the easiest thing for us to get done. Okay. But anyway, we're very pleased about that. I'm looking forward to the data, and hopefully this high school science group will get involved in analyzing some of that data. Next slide, Tom. So what can you do? And this is part of our general outreach. Last slide is learn about and understand the problem, provide feedback to the town staff as well as to the committee. If you're interested in hosting an information session, we are certainly reaching out to many of the organizations and beach communities within town and offering to provide our view of sea level rise and our recommendations to those. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, and understand the fiscal impacts on the individuals in the town, which have a very high likelihood of being significant. So the sooner we start to think about this, the sooner we start to incorporate sea level rise and climate change into our plans, the better off we will be prepared for the future when these events happen. And again, we hope they don't happen. That's not a very good strategy. So, any questions or comments?
So I have a question which will probably sound not like it's intended, so I apologize. According to the information you presented, in 85 years, 40 or 50% of the town will be underwater.
What was the last part? In 85 years?
40 or 50% of the town will be underwater, barring it worse if there's a storm, right? So short of bringing in fill and raising the land, I just don't understand what is a homeowner in Chalker Beach or Indian Town or North or South Cove to do? They can put their house on stilts, but if ultimately under those stilts is water.
You're not gonna be able to get out.
Right, so what?
We think